Yo, what's going on, guys? It is time for another reaction video. This is coming from the YouTube channel Spain Revealed. So if you like this video and want to see more from them, go check them out. It's Spain Revealed on YouTube. This is 11 things you should not do in Spain. Let's get right into it.
What are the 11 things that you should not do in Spain? Today we're covering those unwritten social rules that I've learned the hard way so you don't need to. So venga, let's go. Hey guys, I'm James Blick.
And I'm Yolanda Martin.
And welcome to Spain Revealed. This channel's all about helping you explore Spain like a local. And look, Spain is a pretty easygoing place. But in the 8 years I've been here, there's a number of things that I've learned, a number of rules that I've learned with your help, Yoli, that are things that you just don't do. They're what we would call social faux pas.
And they're things that if you keep in mind, you will be a bit more in sync with the locals when you're here.
And so we're going to count down from 11. We're going to go through the rules that I've learned. In each case, I'm going to state the rule and I'm going to get your take on it, Yoli.
And stick around until the end because number one is really important.
Okay, rule number 11. Here in Spain, we don't say thank you and please, gracias and por favor, constantly. When I first moved here, I felt like I was saying it all the time because in English, we do say thank you and please a lot when we're in shops, when we're, in our constant day-to-day interactions with people, we're constantly using those words. But here in Spain, I just had this weird feeling that I was saying it too much. And so how does that work here, Yoli?
I think it's a matter of tone, so you imply the thanks or the please a little bit more in the way we speak. So, for example, at a bar, you're going to say, me pones una caña cuando puedas. So that's more like, can you pour me a beer when you can? So,
and was there a little rising inflection there?
Yeah, there's like, that kind of, like a nice sort of inflection of the voice. And also, adding that ito, meaning like like a term of endearment. So instead of vino, you say vinito.
So and like a little diminutive.
Yes, exactly, which kind of eases everything a little bit.
It softens it, yeah. So instead of using the words please and thank you constantly, it's interesting how you are building into the language and into the tone those kind of social cues, and that is really hard for a new Spanish speaker. I know for me, I still tend to, if I don't think I can get the tone right, maybe there's a lot of noise and I can't quite get it right, I will use gracias por favor, just to kind of make sure that I'm not being impolite. I know that there's been times when I've not used them and you've said, oh, you didn't quite get the tone right, and it sounded like a command.
But I mean, it is allowed to say gracias and por favor, so if you want to really make it clear, then go ahead, say gracias, say por favor.
Exactly. Okay, rule number 10. When you're eating at a Spanish table, don't put your bread on your plate. This was really interesting when I first moved here because we use bread constantly here. Bread is used to mop up food and to push things onto your fork. But I would often have a piece of bread, everybody has a piece of bread while they're eating, and I would find a spot on my plate. But we don't do that here, right?
No, it's more, I guess that bread is considered a utensil as well in a way. So you put it next to your knife and fork. Also, if you put it on your plate, it might get soggy. So you don't want to be kind of like, then, using your hand to pick up the bread and
Is there a place setting though for each plate? Because if I'm at a restaurant, I would much rather put the bread on my plate than on a table that's been used by other people and could have possibly not been cleaned down properly. I don't know if that's just, even if you're using it as a utensil, I don't know. As long as it doesn't offend someone, I would probably still find myself putting the bread on the plate just because I wouldn't want to put it directly on the table. I just feel like it would, I don't ever just put food on a surface without the food being on a dish, a plate, a napkin, something, not just directly on a countertop or a tabletop. That's just me though.
I want to be kind of like, then, using your hand to pick up the bread and soak the things, and it's all soggy. So.
It's interesting, and I love how in the end, the fact that we don't put bread on the plate actually reflects, the root of that is how we use bread differently here. And as I say, we use it as a utensil. I think that's very cool. I love it because it feels very medieval to have your big chunk of bread sitting right on your table. So I think it's really fun and something I really enjoy. So rule number 9, and it's another eating one. Eating ones are fascinating, and that is you shouldn't have either of your hands under the table when you're eating. I grew up being told off for having my elbows on the table, and you're not allowed to do that here either.
No.
But there's this extra one that didn't exist in New Zealand of not having one of your hands under the table while you're eating, and you tell me off for this quite often because I forget. So what is this rule all about?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea why it is. I was told once that it might be just to make sure that you don't have a knife under the table, that you might stab me. We're back to
so much
medieval
trust
times.
in our relationship, you know?
I know. It's true that I feel kind of like,
I'm like figuring out what would you do with your hands. So if you're not using both hands to eat, or maybe you're done eating and somebody else is still eating, you are supposed to put your hands on the table. And I don't know that I would actually put my hands under the table while eating unless to adjust a napkin. Oh, that's a weird one. I don't know. I don't think anything's wrong with it, but I'm just trying to think what I would be doing with my hand otherwise. I mean, I would want to be as respectful as possible and not do it, obviously, if it's not part of the culture. But I wonder, now next time I eat, I'm just going to have to see like where my hands are if they're not both in use to eat. If I'm only using one hand to eat and not the other, what am I doing with that other hand?
weird if I have someone that is kind of eating and their hand is there. It's like, just show yourself there. You know, it's very cultural, I guess.
There's something very Spanish in that. I love it. It makes me conjures thoughts of the Spanish Inquisition. I might have a dagger under the table or something like that. But I think that's it. I mean, when we think about, and I believe this is the case, like the root of why we shake hands is, you know, to show that you don't have a weapon, to kind of, you know, reveal yourself to someone. And I think it's probably the same thing. For you, let us know.
That kind of makes more sense. I mean, but and then it just carried on that way throughout time. It's just now it's become part of the custom. So I get the origin of it. But I don't see anything wrong with it. It's just a unique one.
In the comments if that exists in any other country, you know, where you're watching, because I'm really curious about that one. But remember, keep your hands above the table. Okay, rule number 8. If someone comes to your house at about 5 p.m., don't offer them a drink. A beer or a glass of wine. And so what happened here, and I really remember this when we first moved here, is that a couple that we know, Diego and Sonia, they came over, and you were talking to Sonia, I'm not sure, but Diego, I offered him a beer, and it was 5 p.m. And he was like, I don't want a beer, I want a café con leche. And I was like, oh, of course, it's like too early to have a beer. But in New Zealand, you would offer someone a beer if they came over at 5 p.m. So unpack this a little bit for us, y'all. Yeah,
so, you know, in the end, you know, we have lunch later, we have dinner later. So, of course, also, you know, beer o'clock is not 5 p.m. It's like 8 p.m., 9 p.m., you know, usually. So we do delay, you know, the time of having a beer.
I really like that way of thinking about it. Beer o'clock is not 5 p.m. Beer o'clock is 8 p.m. in Spain. That's very, very cool. He had his café con leche. I quickly put the beer back in the fridge and grabbed the...
Felt embarrassed?
Felt like an alcoholic.
Whenever I have guests over, I just open the fridge and I'm always like, help yourself to whatever you want. I got, and I always start with the non-alcoholic beverages. I'm like, I got tea, soda, water, and then I'll go into beers, and then coffee, and then alcohol, right? So like, I'll let people choose whatever they want based on their preference. You know, when I have guests over here to film, to do reaction videos with me, or to be on my podcast, same thing. I'll say, hey, fridge is open, have whatever you want. That way I'm not really, I guess, pushing alcohol or coffee based on a certain time of the day. But I do understand that I hear that, you know, Spain, everything is later in the day there. So it makes sense. But yeah, that's my way around it. That's my way around of not offending somebody, I guess you could say, is just offer them everything and let them choose what they want.
And made coffee. I didn't have a beer, even though I was ready for one. We just moved here. And so what happened is he did have a beer later, but he just needed his cup of coffee and things like that. Okay, rule number 7. When you go to someone's house for dinner or a party, you don't stay behind to help with the dishes. Now, I'm curious about this one because maybe it was just the time we were living in New Zealand, or, you know, something about our circle of friends. So I'm really keen to hear your thoughts. But here in New Zealand, I felt like you would sort of stay behind and help with the dishes or help tidy up. But here I remember being really surprised that once the party's over, once the dinner party's over, you just leave. You're out. Which is great if you're at someone's house and terrible if they're at your house. So, I mean, is there something here, Yoli?
I would say that I mean a little bit of tidying up is allowed and thanked for. So yeah, people might get up and they take the dishes to the kitchen and stuff like that. But then to go as far as to actually doing the dishes, that is a little bit much. I don't think a lot of people do that here in Spain.
As somebody who has hosted many parties and big gatherings at my house when I had a house before, I'm living now in a high rise, I always appreciated when people would offer to help. And just the same as when I'm a guest at somebody else's house or gathering or party or what have you, if I end up being one of the last people there, I will definitely stick around and do what I can to help. Now, sometimes that might just mean getting all the dishes to the sink. Sometimes it might mean, giving them a good rinse and separating out the dishes to then go into a dishwasher, or maybe they're going to do a hand wash later. I don't know. Everybody's house is different, right? But to me, it's a way of saying thank you for being the host and having us over and providing food and drinks and a good environment. The least I can do is to give back by helping to clean a little bit. And sometimes, like when I'm the host, if people offer to do that, I'm always grateful and thankful of that. That being said, I am very OCD, and if I am hosting a party, a gathering, I'm constantly cleaning the entire time as I go, so that come to the end of the party, the work of cleaning and putting things away isn't as bad as if you just left it all till the end. So I do it as I go to try to eliminate as much as possible.
Doing the dishes, that is a little bit much. I don't think a lot of people do that here in Spain.
So something to keep in mind, because if maybe you said to your Spanish hosts, hey, I'll stay behind and do the dishes, like how would that make them feel?
Yeah,
I saw your face.
Just go away now, like give me a break.
Yeah.
I already had you for like 3-4 hours.
Let us know in the comments, do you stay behind and do the dishes when you go to friends' houses for dinner? Okay, rule number 6, and this is another one about social situations. You're not going to do the dishes, but the other thing is when you go into a party, for example, often in English, at least in New Zealand, I think the culture is, and I suspect in the States and the UK, one of the first questions you will ask people is what their job is.
Yeah.
So what do you do? And that's kind of like a safe way to start a conversation.
Yeah.
But if you said here in Spain, ¿en qué trabajas? Like, what's your job? How would that be for a Spaniard?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not the first question that you ask. We tend to, we're socializing, we're like having fun. So usually, unless you're like really passionate about your work, you don't talk about work straight away like that. Maybe, if it's relevant at some point, you're talking about, what you do in your, day to day, then yes, maybe you are going to say, what do you do? But other than that, yeah, usually you don't get straight there, no.
Yeah, it's a little too, it's almost a bit pesado.
Yes, a little bit pesado.
It's a great word, pesado. Pesado means to be intense. And so I think sometimes in social situations in Spain, I've found that I could come across as a bit pesado because I will come in and I will be like, hey, what's your job? And it's like, whoa, back off,
I'm having fun here.
Exactly, let's kind of ease into the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like more, ¿qué tal? How's it going? And you kind of work towards it.
Yeah.
Another thing you often catch me out on, Yoli, is that somebody, Spanish speaker will be telling a story and I will ask them what happened while they're still in the middle of the story. It's almost like I expect them to cut to the chase.
You want the conclusion really fast, yeah.
And maybe that's a difference between English and Spanish, that in English, we cut to the chase faster sometimes?
Couple comments on this. So when it comes to introductions, I usually will introduce myself if it's somebody new. Try to find something to talk about, but if you can't find an opening piece of conversation, then the job is quite often the go-to, but it's not always the go-to. It just depends. It might be also how do you know the guest or the person that's hosting the people here. It might be, seasonally, how's your summer going? Are you ready for Christmas or whatever, right? So that might be another way to lead into conversation outside of going straight into employment, but it does often come back to employment at some point. Sometimes it might be earlier on in the conversation. I think you gauge it with the person you're talking to, right? Now, the other one he just mentioned about cutting to the chase, right? So I grew up with a Cuban dad, right? So my dad is great at details. If you watched my podcast, my first episode of my podcast was my dad and my mom, and my dad telling his journey of leaving Cuba and coming to the U.S. We filmed it twice. The first time we filmed it, we had some audio issues, but also my dad was so incredibly detailed. It was like 3 hours long, and I knew that no one was going to watch a 3-hour podcast. So I was like, Dad, we got to cut some of the details and get to the point a little bit quicker on some parts of this so that we can keep it around an hour, right? But just in life growing up with my dad, you know, sometimes I would be like, all right, just come on, get to the point. What is the point of this story or this conversation? I don't need to know what the temperature was outside and what color somebody's shirt was. And if we're writing a book or trying to set the scene for a movie, a bit different story. But if you're just telling me some quick sort of story about something, I don't need to know all those details. So I kind of have a feeling that might be what he's kind of going into here. But I would never really cut off somebody mid-story to try to cut to the chase. I can do it with my dad because it's different, right? But in conversation in general, I wouldn't really just cut people off to try to get to the point of the conversation.
That's a difference between English and Spanish, that in English we cut to the chase faster sometimes?
I reckon, yeah. So, you know, when we're, the conversational style is different, I think, in Spanish.
The person telling the story will kind of take longer to get there, will kind of build to the conclusion and almost circle the story and come in closer and closer to the conclusion, whereas I'm expecting them to go like that. And Yoli's like, told me off after parties, like, you got to give people time to tell their story.
Sounds like I'm always telling you off.
It's true. Yoli is not always telling me off. I want to make that clear. You're always helping me understand this wonderful culture.
Exactly.
So rule number 5, don't be surprised if people raise their voices. So when we were first started going out and I would hear you call your mother, I didn't speak Spanish, and so I didn't understand what you were saying, but it sounded like you were arguing the whole time with her.
Which I probably was anyway.
You weren't arguing in the way I thought. It sounded like you were arguing, and there's a certain kind of intensity often that you can get into in Spanish conversation.
Can definitely relate to this. Even though I don't know Spanish, my dad and his brothers, when they get on the phone together, get together in person, they all start talking in Spanish. It can get loud really quickly, and it seems like they might be aggressive or even upset with each other, but most of the time it's just they're just talking and they just get louder. Now at their older age, their hearing is not as good as it used to be either. So, but in my household with my family, even though we're not speaking Spanish, we're speaking English. With my parents, I say my household. I don't have any kids or wife or anything like that. I meant with my parents if I'm having a conversation with my parents and my siblings. Sometimes we can get loud with each other and people might misinterpret it as we're arguing or something, but we're not really. It's just the way we communicate. We just, we talk, sometimes we talk loudly, sometimes we can be more direct and to the point. And maybe sometimes it might be misinterpreted as sounding harsh to one another, but we're not. We're just like, just tell me what you need to tell me. Let's get to whatever the point is, and let's move on. So I think that's kind of what they're leading into here. I totally get what he's saying, though, where it sounds like it's confrontational and it's not.
Arguing, and there's a certain kind of intensity often that you can get into in Spanish conversation that sounds very heated, but it's not necessarily. Is that correct, do you think?
I reckon, yeah, and also we do have like a a louder way of speaking. I do think that we speak loud. So yeah, that might be also sometimes kind of confused with they're having an argument.
Totally. Whereas I feel like my conversations with my mother, if they had that same tone or that same kind of level, I would hang up and think, I feel terrible. And so I think that, just don't be surprised when you're hearing that and don't assume that that's necessarily an argument. It may sound heated, but it's not necessarily. So that's just something important so you don't misread a situation. Rule number 4. Don't generalize about Spain.
Which is something that we're doing right now.
Which exactly is something we're doing right now. And it's actually something I get a lot of comments about in the comment section of the videos of people, I'll make certain statements or we'll make statements in these videos and people will say, yeah, but that's something that happens in Madrid, that doesn't happen in Galicia, or that doesn't happen in Catalonia.
I've actually run into this with some of the comments on my videos. And I don't think the comments are really as directed at me as more of the original content creator that I'm reacting to. Sometimes they'll correct things that they feel are incorrect. But yeah, never really, I don't feel like it's directed at me. And even if it was, I wouldn't take offense to it. I think most people don't want to be generalized, right? Like it's kind of like any culture or country, like when people have their stereotypes about the US or Texas specifically, right? Quite often it's assumed that we're all cowboys and we ride around on horses and cows, and It's not like that at all, to be honest. Like I like my interaction with people in a cowboy boots and a hat on a day-to-day basis are almost zero. You know, like you might once in a while run into somebody like that, unless it's like rodeo season or something. But yeah, so those types of stereotypes now, do they offend me? Not one bit. I actually kind of chuckle and think they're kind of funny, because I always love to see people who've never been here come here, and they're like, wow, this is a big city and everything's really fast paced here, and I don't see anybody wearing cowboy hats. I'm like, yeah, it's because it's not a Western movie.
And I think, you know, this is obviously a country, but it's easy from the outside to see it a little more simply than maybe someone inside the country sees it. So tell us a little bit about that, Yoli.
I think that people here feel very passionate about their region, so even the village where their parents came from. Yeah, I think the regionality, you need to look at Spain as a really regional country. It's very important to be aware of that, of not making a lot of generalizations about the food, the culture, the habits. Yeah,
exactly, because you might talk about flamenco. Now there's not a lot of flamenco in Galicia, for example. No. It's not a traditional art form up there, whereas it is in Andalusia. Now there might be a flamenco show up there potentially for tourists, and there's people who love flamenco in Galicia, for example. But I think you have to be careful about these generalizations, and as you say, with food as well, like paella is not from all of Spain.
No.
And so I just think it's important to kind of educate yourself a little bit about that, because if you were speaking to a Spaniard and you made certain generalizations about Spain, you might not show yourself to be as culturally aware.
Yeah.
And if you show yourself to be a little more culturally aware, then I think that will be appreciated.
Yeah.
Okay, rule number 3. If you're traveling in Barcelona or you're in Catalonia, do not call Catalan a dialect of Spanish. It's its own language. And this is a trap I see a lot of people fall into, because it could, from the outside, potentially look a little similar, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not quite a language, but it is. It is a language. It's a co-official language in Spain, as well as other languages in Spain.
I had no idea about that. I had no clue whatsoever that that language even existed.
It's a co-official language in Spain, as well as other languages in Spain. Yes, spoken by fewer people, of course, than Castilian or Spanish. But yeah, definitely co-official and a language.
Exactly. And I think also something, a little tip that is kind of complex, but let's see if I can simplify it a little bit. Particularly when I'm traveling around Spain and there's other languages that are spoken, whether it's Galician or whether it's Basque, I'm mindful of when I talk about Español, like Spanish language, I call it Castellano, because it's a little more specific, because potentially, and tell me if I'm right here, Yoli, that if I am speaking to somebody who is in Galicia or is in Catalonia and I call Castellano, Spanish, Español, I'm almost saying that their language is not a Spanish language. There can be some sensibilities around that.
Yeah, especially when, kind of compare with the other co-official languages. Yeah, definitely. So, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I prefer to say Castellano. Now, Español, I believe, is an official term for Castellano.
Both, yeah. So Español and Castellano work, mean the same pretty much.
So I'm sure I'm going to get some comments there on that one. But
go ahead.
Exactly, go ahead. I mean, educate us. Let me know if I've got this a little bit wrong, but I prefer to err on the side of saying Castellano when I'm speaking about Castilian as a language. Rule number 2, and it's another language one, and this one is don't use usted, the formal form of saying you, willy-nilly. Don't go crazy with that. I know, having learned French, I would use it all the time, because in French you are more likely to use the formal way to address people, but here it's really reduced. So how does this work, Yoli? When would we use tú and when would we use usted?
I reckon we use usted for like really formal situations, so if you're kind of meeting, I don't know, like a teacher or something that really there is like a like an upper sort of level,
or someone older,
someone older, yeah, totally, someone older, but like maybe like 80 years old and up.
The only time I really use usted is when I'm offering to help an old lady or old man on the metro. It literally is the only time that I use it.
¿Le puedo ayudar?
Exactly, le puedo ayudar, and I get really excited because it's a great chance to use it, I also want to help them. But, you would use it if you met the king, you would use it with someone who, was a lot older than you or in a lot more kind of formal capacity. But apart from that, it's tú all the way, the informality.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, rule number 1, the most important one you could say, or just something that's really complex and you have to be pretty aware of. And that's when you're talking to people, don't get into the Spanish Civil War or the dictatorship unless you know them pretty well. It's such a complex issue still in this country. It's an open wound. And
when I was talking about comments that are sometimes left on my videos, a lot of it has to do with this, because some of the videos I've done reactions to are history based. and factually, I don't know what is accurate because I didn't make the original video. So when people are displeased with the way some of the stuff is presented, I don't really respond because I don't know who's right and who's wrong, or if one region sees it different than another region. I have no idea. I'm just simply reacting and trying to learn. But yeah, so I don't know. It's one of those that, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going with it, but I have a feeling it's kind of similar to these comments that I get sometimes on these videos when I do the history-based ones.
A lot of ways, and people's families were wrapped up in it in a lot of different ways. So I think you just have to be really careful before you launch into it. It's a fascinating subject, one that's so important and interesting to learn about and know more about. But I think you just have to be, as I say, careful before diving in. So help us understand this a little bit, Yoli.
So I'd say two things here. First is, right after the Civil War, we had a dictatorship that lasted for 40 years. So during those 40 years, you weren't really allowed to speak freely about the Civil War, you know. So, there was repression, there was censorship. So the subject wasn't closed off right after, the war finished.
Okay, so given that it wasn't closed off, it's sort of like there wasn't like a national understanding of kind of what happened or what the country believes or agrees on.
Exactly.
So there's no kind of...
There's no agreement yet.
Exactly. So if you dive into it, if it was kind of closed off and dealt with, then everybody would sort of be on the same page. And I think that's the point. So I think it's a really, really good way of understanding it. What was the second point?
I would say that also that we're talking about a civil war. That's one of the worst things that can happen to a country, So we're talking about families being, broken up, villages that are, like split, cousins hitting each other. I mean, really sad stuff. So it's hard, to talk, about an event like that, of course.
Exactly. And people might have certain views now, but their family back then might have had different views or, and there can be conflict within families or have been conflict within families. So I just think, it's a fascinating subject to learn about and talk about, but just be a little careful before you dive in. I would love to know your thoughts on what you think about speaking about the Civil War with people. So do let us know in the comments because it's a really, really important topic here in Spain. I hope these 11 rules have been really helpful for you.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. In general, I try to avoid talking about politics whatsoever as much as I can. I never want to offend anyone or push my beliefs on anybody else. I just don't really want to cross people the wrong way, to each his own. If we don't live the same way, see things the same way, it doesn't really matter to me. It's like you live your life, I live mine. I know what decisions and that I'm going to make for myself and what standards I hold myself to and the way I want to live my life. And I wouldn't expect anybody to feel like they need to live the way I live, just the same as I don't want them to try to impress their ways on me, right? So when it comes to politics and things of that nature, I just try to avoid those conversations. Now, obviously, if you pick up in a conversation that maybe it's obvious that you see eye to eye with somebody on politics, then maybe you can open into those discussions and talk about it. But even still, I feel like I'm very guarded, per se, on those types of discussions. So, yeah. If you liked this video, do give it a thumbs up. It does help. If you want to see more from this channel, it's called Spain Revealed. You can go subscribe to them. And comment below if you feel like their 11 things of not to do are pretty accurate, and if there's anything that you would add or remove from the list. And we'll wrap it up here, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.